What's up, everybody? Michael Walsh here. So I've got a very important and very awesome video for you today, because while this is sort of masking as a response video to Paddy Pimblett versus Justin Gaethje, that is merely the Trojan horse for me to give you a top 15 MMA fights of all time list. And honestly, I don't know if there's a single video someone like me could create that could offer more value to the viewer. And bear in mind, every fight, all 15 fights I'm going to list here, are on YouTube for free. So you can look up all of them. Highly encouraged. If you've seen them already, rewatch them. If you haven't seen anything on this list, go watch it ASAP. Okay, these are goated fights. Okay, now at the forefront, I want to say that, like I said in a previous video, I'm not hating on Paddy versus Justin. I think that was an exceptional fight. I think that will likely win Fight of the Year. You know, we'll see what happens, but at the very worst, it will be a candidate, and I think it will likely win. I think it's one of the best fights we've seen in recent years. I think it's better than certain all-time beloved classics that people will sort of, I would argue, ignorantly toss out as greatest fights of all time candidates. So, for example, I think Paddy versus Justin is better than Lawler versus McDonald 2. I think it is better than Dan Henderson versus Shogun Rua 1. You know, I think it's close, but I think Paddy versus Justin is better. There's fights that I thought would be on this list because, to give some context, the reason I sort of made this video in the first place was that in response to the video I put out a couple days ago, kind of assessing how good this fight was and arguing that there were several fights that were better, in that video I saw some people in the comment section, you know, kind of discussing and debating where to place Paddy versus Justin in the all-time fight rankings. And I saw a few people agree that it's probably top 15. And at that time, when I saw that comment, I was like, yeah, top 15 sounds about right. But then I mulled it over a little and I said, you know, I'm pretty sure I can come up with 15 better fights. And so I put my mind to it. And I actually gave myself a handicap for this video. No fighter gets to appear twice on this list. So if a fighter, if there's a fight from a given fighter on this list, that's it. You can't have any other fights from that guy. And that disqualified certain otherwise worthy contenders from being on this list. And, you know, you can fill in the blanks when you see the fights listed. And, you know, I'm sure other fights from these people will come to mind and be like, I could also see so-and-so versus so-and-so being on the list. If they are not, it's because another fight of theirs is on the list. Now, that's why I made this list. But when I was making it, there were fights that came to mind that I thought would be on this list or could be on this list and that I at least thought were better than Paddy versus Justin. But then on rewatch, I was like, you know, having seen them both recently, I think Paddy versus Justin is better. So, for example, Joe Lauzon versus Jim Miller 1, you know, a classic, you know, an all-time great fight. In my memory, I was like, yeah, I'm pretty sure that was a better fight than Paddy versus Justin. But then I rewatched it, and I was like, you know, no, I got to give it to Paddy versus Justin. That's just how fucking good Paddy versus Justin was. So I'm not hating on that fight. And I also recognize that fan turnover in MMA is very quick. I think it's 2 to 3 years. So if you've only been watching MMA for a couple of years, it's not unreasonable that Paddy versus Justin is the best fight you've ever seen. So, and I'm not criticizing anyone who's in that position, but I've been watching this sport, as I've said many times, I've been watching this sport since 2005. So I've seen a lot of great fights come and go over the years. You know, I was talking to a buddy of mine after I comprised my list and I kind of shared it with him on Messenger. And he's like, I think Gomi versus Diaz should be on here. Gomi versus Nick Diaz, that is. You know, for my buddy, that's his favorite fight of all time. Spoiler alert, Gomi versus Diaz is not on the list. I personally don't think I could in good faith say that's a better fight than Paddy versus Justin, though it's up there. It's up there. It would be somewhere on a greatest fights of all time list. But if I had to rank them, I would narrowly put Paddy versus Justin ahead of that one, actually. And again, to put this in perspective, I saw Gomi versus Diaz live back in 2007. I was at my buddy's house. I'm pretty sure that's the same event where Dan Henderson knocked out Wanderlei Silva. I remember watching that, you know, late one Saturday night or whatever at his house. I saw that shit live. I remember it was awesome. I've rewatched it since, of course. But, you know, a lot of thought went into this list. And before I get into it, I'm just going to say, there's fights from everywhere. There's UFC fights. There's Pride fights. There's Bellator fights. There's WEC fights. There's a fight from rings. There's a bunch of like regional fights. Like this is a very diverse list. There are some deep cuts, you know, that I'd wager. I'd be kind of shocked if anyone watching this video has seen each of these fights. You know, I'll just say that. And I'll say as well that for this list, I wanted it to only include fights that I could say like definitively are better than Paddy versus Justin. So if there's a fight I'm on the fence about where I'm like, I kind of like that better than Paddy versus Justin, if I had to make a list of every fight and rank them, it would probably be ahead of Justin versus Paddy, but I'm kind of on the fence about it. I didn't want any fights like that. I wanted 15 fights that just on reflex, if asked, I would say that fight is better than Justin versus Paddy. Because there's some fights that I considered. So like, for example, in the previous video I made, I said Paddy versus Justin is about as good as Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot 1. I have since rewatched Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot 1. I kind of prefer it to Paddy versus Justin. I kind of think rounds 4 and 5 are just so good in Mark Hunt versus Bigfoot Silva 1 that if I were going to make like a definitive top 100 fights of all time list or something, I would probably put Bigfoot versus Hunt 1 ahead of Paddy versus Justin. But it's neck and neck. So I was like, I'm not going to renege on that. I'm not going to put that on this list. Likewise, and I knew I would catch hell if I put this fight on this list, but a totally underrated and forgotten, like, goated fight is James Thompson versus Hidehiko Yoshida in Pride. That fight, it's not long. It only, it doesn't make it past the first round. Now, bear in mind, that's a Pride round, so the first round was 10 minutes, so it actually goes for, like, 7 or 8 minutes or something. But within that 7 or 8 minutes, you see fucking judo throws. You see like tight submission attempts that are escaped from. You see someone like slam someone to get out of an armbar. You see back and forth momentum where the guy who ultimately wins the fight is just getting like walloped on and rocked on his feet. And then he ultimately comes back later and finishes the other guy with strikes. Like that fight kind of gives you everything you could want in an MMA fight, all packed into like 7 minutes. And they're heavyweights. And there's a big size gap and a big skill gap because Yoshida's an Olympic gold medalist in judo and Thompson is like a famously sloppy, like massive heavyweight. And so you see some like fatigue set in. I think it was a short notice fight as well. So, it's a war of attrition despite being so short. And that fight is golden. I absolutely love that fight. James Thompson, despite getting memed on and despite never being that skilled, is a very underrated, like, blood and guts action fighter. I'll just say that much. But I didn't put that fight on this list again because while I might put it ahead of Paddy versus Justin if I had to make a definitive list, it would only be narrowly. And I wanted, again, fights that just, like, if asked, like, no thought needed, I will say this fight is better than Paddy versus Justin. And I only wanted 15. And again, the big handicap for myself was that no fighter could appear on this list twice. Okay? So that's what this list is. And I'm going to get into it now. It is vaguely in order, but, I didn't put too much thought into exactly what order each of these fights needs to be in. If my mood is different, I might shuffle it a little. I cared more that these fights are just definitely better than Paddy versus Justin and that I could strongly recommend them on that front. Okay? So, with that preamble done, let's get into the fucking list. At number 15, I have Shogun Rua versus Rogerio Nogueira 1 back in Pride. This fight is just an epic scrap. You get a bit of everything. You get guys getting dropped, just walloping each other on the feet. You get some cool takedowns. You get soccer kicks and stomps and like Shogun just like jumping over Nogueira's guard to try to stomp on him. You get him like doing the diving Superman punch through the guard. You get submission attempts. You get sweeps and reversals. You get just everything. You get up kicks. I mean, this fight is like an all-terrain MMA fight, and it's pretty much a banger from the first round to the end of the last round. Okay? Now, with these fights, I'm going to spoil some of how the fights go, as that just, as you no doubt gleaned from my description of that fight. But with some fights, I'm going to restrain myself a little because some of the appeal of some of these specific matchups is to just go in them like fresh and not even know what to expect and just be shocked by what happens. But I'll give you a little bit of context, throughout. So that's my number 15. And at number 14, I have Esteban Ribovic versus Daniel Zellhuber. So this is the fight from UFC Noche, the first one. That one fight of the night. I remember, like, I was, watching the fights online. And I was, that card was pretty weak. And I was pretty much only interested in like the top couple of fights from the card. But I was seeing online people saying, holy shit, like that Zell Huber fight was amazing. It's one of the best fights of all time. Like, holy shit, go watch it. And so I looked it up. I was watching it. And I remember for like the first 2 rounds, I was like, this fight's good, but this isn't like that great. Like I could see this maybe winning fight of the night, but this is not one of the best fights of all time. Yeah, they're good, but not great. But once round 3 comes, like all hell breaks loose. Like that is one of the best rounds in MMA history. And you see like 100 punch combination or something like that. It's fucking nuts. So that fight, worthy of the hype. And this is where, again, like I'm not against recency bias if it's accurate. You'll see there's a few like pretty recent fights on this list, including that one. That's from like 2024. So it's not that Justin Gaethje versus Paddy Pimblett being new disqualifies it. I'm just saying, recency bias has to be backed up. It has to be backed up by the truth of the fight. And this is a recent fight that deserves to be here. At number 13, I have Wanderlei Silva versus Brian Stann. Okay, this is just one of the most like nutter butters, crazy exchanges, both guys getting hurt and dropped kind of fight you're ever going to see. Go look it up. I don't want to say more than that. At number 12, I have Forrest Griffin versus Stephan Bonnar. Now, this holds up. I've seen some people kind of dismiss this fight as like, it was just sloppy. It's not as good as people say it is. Yeah, it was an important fight, but it's overrated. Horseshit. This fight is exceptional. These guys are just going for it like nuts, reckless abandon, urgency throughout, just getting exhausted, shit-kicking each other. This fight earned its reputation, okay? And Forrest Griffin has some great fights. Like, my buddy of mine was alerting me to the fact that, like, he's like, if you haven't rewatched it recently, like, Forrest Griffin versus Shogun Rua 1 is fucking awesome. And because I largely just remembered that fight for Shogun, like, shitting the bed and losing. But I went back and rewatched it. It's awesome. And Shogun avenges that loss and knocks Forrest out, but like that first fight is awesome. But Forrest Griffin versus Bonnar 1 is better. Okay, and I think it's better than Shogun versus Nogueira 1. Okay, which I think is Shogun's best fight. So bear that in mind. I should have said this at the forefront. Every fight on this video, every fight on this list will be in the description, so don't worry about that. This is a low tech video. I don't have all the names on screen. Bear with me. I got to get more followers before I start giving you guys that kind of quality of production. But so like and subscribe if you want that shit to happen, and watch these videos and comment. Anyways, moving on to number 11, Cub Swanson versus Doo-Ho Choi. Chef's kiss. This was a war. I remember watching this at my brother's. It's the same card that Pettis fought Holloway on. This fight is legendary. Cub Swanson is a legendary, like woefully underappreciated action fighter, and this is his best fight. Okay, it's a war throughout. I don't want to really describe it too much. Just go watch it. Goated fight. Another classic that holds up. It earns its reputation because some fights are like they were shocking at the time, but they're just not that great. Honestly, like Gustaffson versus Jones 1, great fight, but that's not even sniffing a list like this. Okay, but this one holds up. Number 10, Andreas Gustaffson versus Toni Lampinen. Now, people shit on me because I hyped up Gustaffson coming into the UFC as just an action fighter. I never thought he'd go far. I never thought he'd like win a belt or anything. I just said as an action fighter, I haven't been this hyped since Justin Gaethje came from the WSOF into the UFC, or since Jerry came from Ryzen into the UFC, okay? Now, some huge amount of the reason for that hype was this specific fight, okay? Gustaffson versus Lampinen is just a brutal, bloody war. And by bloody, I mean bloody. Like, both guys get fucking just gushing blood. And they just stand and trade. There's a little bit of clinching, don't get me wrong, but like the amount of just standing and trading and walloping each other in this fight is crazy. Like this is a low key, like all-time great regional fight war. Okay, moving on. Number 9, Adrian Luna versus Mike Vologdin. So this is that Dana White Contender Series fight that everyone was praising. Like in the title of the video on YouTube, they actually just say in all caps like best fight of all time. And it's so good that you're not even like mad they call the video that, okay? Like this is just an absolute war. It's too low level. I mean, not low level. I mean, they're low level relative to the UFC. They're high level in terms of just the world MMA space. But too low level UFC, tryout bantamweights just trying to kill each other pillar to post. Okay, this fight is exceptional. Go watch it. Number 8, Matt Brown versus Erick Silva. This is peak Matt Brown. Kind of like Cub Swanson, an underrated, too often forgotten, just reliable action fighter. Guy fought like he tried to kill people. You see all of the Matt Brown like classics. You see him going for submissions. You see him hitting the Muay Thai foot sweeps. You see him using the elbows. Erick Silva was like an up-and-coming action fighter who didn't quite pan out, and maybe this ass-kicking is part of the reason why. But this fight was exceptional. It was also during Matt Brown's like hopeful run to the title that got ultimately derailed when he fought Robbie Lawler. But in any case, one of the best fights of all time. This is like the kind of fight I show people if they've never watched a UFC fight before and I'm trying to give the best impression. Matt Brown versus Erick Silva. Number 7, Justin Gaethje versus Luis Palomino 1. Okay, I said Paddy versus Justin is not the best fight of all time. It is not even the best Justin Gaethje fight of all time. Okay, and there's plenty to pick from on that list, but I'd argue the best is the first fight with Luis Palomino back in WSOF. This is just peak Justin Gaethje being a wild man. After he came to the UFC and lost twice in a row to Eddie and to Dustin, he cleaned his style up a bit. He's like been more restrained ever since, including against Paddy. This is peak wild man Justin Gaethje. It ends with a fucking TKO to low kicks finish. This is Justin Gaethje, this fight. Okay, so go watch it. Number 6, a man who's too often shit on now and not beloved. Michael Chandler versus Eddie Alvarez 1. Okay, this is where Chandler wins the belt. This fight is just another like all-terrain ass-kicking MMA fight. There's like guys getting fucked up on the feet. There's great takedowns and scrambles. It like ends in a submission. This is just a war bell to bell. You know, I would argue it's both men's best fights. You know, the rematch is underrated too. Fantastic. But the first fight is better. I'd say it's Chandler's best fight. I'd say it's better than any Dustin Poirier fight, better than any Justin Gaethje fight, better than any Eddie Alvarez fight, better than any Tony Ferguson fight. This fight is goated for a reason, okay? Moving on. Number 5, Gilbert Yvel versus Bob Schrijber. So, Gilbert Yvel, famous cheat, famous violent man, dangerous striker. He fought this guy, Bob Schrijber, back in rings, and this is just a war, okay? You know, these two guys and Semi Schiltz had like great fights with each other, but of the lot of them, this is by far the best, and it is just all action from start to finish. And it does go to a finish. So, go watch that one. Don Frye versus Takayama at number 4. If you know, you know. I don't even want to say anything about it. If you don't know, just go watch it, okay? Don Frye versus Yoshihiro Takayama in Pride, okay? Number 4. Number 3, Melvin Manhoef versus Cyborg Santos. Now, I gave this fight a shout-out in my previous video, and a couple of people didn't like it. They went and looked it up, and they said, it starts out good, but they get tired, and it gets really sloppy. It's like, yeah, that's what makes it awesome. It starts out, these guys are both dangerous strikers. They come out, looking crisp, looking clean, but they're throwing everything with 100% like killer force, and they're fighting at a really high pace in their middleweights. They end up getting exhausted, and it becomes like this attritional blood and guts war where they're just swinging and trying to kill each other, and their defense is gone. And it has back and forth momentum. Both guys get hurt, and it goes to a fucking knockout. Like, I feel like Goldmember from Austin Powers, where he's like, "Can I offer you a smoke and a pancake? No, a cigar and a waffle. Pipe and a cripe, bong and a blintz." And then Austin's like, "No." And he's like, "Then there is no pleasing you." Okay? If you don't like Melvin Manhoef versus Cyborg Santos, then there is no pleasing you. Okay? I don't know what else to say. So that's number 3. Number 2, Leonard Garcia versus Korean Zombie 1 from WEC. Wild is the word for it. Okay? This is the wildest fight in history. I'll just say that. Go watch it. Number 1. From One Championship. Yes, there's a One Championship fight here. This was for, I think, the middleweight belt. But it is Aung, Long, and Song versus Lee Hasegawa. This fight takes a little bit to get going. It's sort of like the Ribovich fight I mentioned earlier. If you're watching the first 2 rounds, you'll be like, this is pretty good, but this isn't like the best fight of all time. But holy shit, does it build into one of the greatest, brutalist wars ever. That's all I'm going to say about it, because just fun shit happens. Momentum swings happen. It is brutal. It is attritional. It does go to a finish. I don't want to say more than that. Go check it out. Okay? Now bear in mind, don't get too hot and bothered about the order of this list. So, the vague order is correct. Like the number 15 would never be number 1. But if you shuffled this around a bit, I wouldn't object. And again, the point of this is just that these are 15 fights that I can say without hesitation are better than Paddy versus Justin. And I highly encourage you all go check them out.